I bought the cabin on a whim, or at least that's what I told myself when people asked what led me to such an impulsive decision. Truth was, it wasn't entirely impulsive. Something about it called to me, buried deep in that real estate listing, nestled between fixer-uppers and overpriced vacation homes. Something about the photograph, the way the pine trees loomed in the background, their jagged edges bleeding into the gray sky, the way the cabin stood so still and silent like it was, waiting, not abandoned but expectant, and I convinced myself that it was the peace and quiet I craved after the burnout of my job, the endless city noise, the screens, the deadlines, the unrelenting hum of other people's lives crowding mine. But a part of me knew that there was something more, something unspoken, something hidden within those woods behind the cabin that pulled at me, not like a whisper but like a weight on the chest, heavy and patient. And so I moved, packed up my carefully constructed life in a single trip, stuffed my car with essentials, and left behind the hollow shell of who I used to be, thinking that solitude would fix me, that hiking alone through unmarked trails would heal whatever unnamed wounds I had been carrying, and for a while it did. The air was cleaner than anything I'd ever breathed, so crisp it almost hurt, and the trees towered like ancient monuments that bore silent witness to something older than memory. And the nights were so dark and star-filled I could swear I was living under an entirely different sky. But then I started to notice the silence, not the peaceful kind, but the thick, oppressive kind that comes before a scream, the kind that settles over you like a predator's gaze. And I began to feel that I was not entirely alone out there. Even when I could see no other soul for miles, the forest had no official trails, but I ventured into it anyway, making my own path with a compass and a rough map I'd scribbled in a journal, tracking the moss growth on trees like some amateur survivalist. And at first, it was exhilarating. The kind of thrill that comes from being completely unobserved by society, truly off-grid. But that changed the day I found the circle, an impossibly perfect ring of stones, each about the size of a human head, worn smooth like river stones, but bone-dry, surrounding a patch of earth that had no vegetation, no leaves, no insects, just a blackened center like it had been burned, though the surrounding woods showed no sign of fire damage. And that night, I heard it for the first time. A knocking sound, distant but deliberate, like someone tapping on the cabin walls with bony fingers, slow and patient. And when I opened the door, there was no one, just the same trees stretching into the distance, silent and unmoving. But I could swear they were closer than before, like they had crept a few inches forward when I wasn't looking. The knocking returned the next night and the next, always at exactly 3:07 a.m. Never a minute before or after, and I began to dread the nights, keeping myself awake with coffee and paranoia. And soon I began to see things out of the corner of my eye during my hikes, things that shouldn't be there, shapes too tall and narrow to be people, not quite trees either, and shadows that moved against the direction of the sun. And I told myself I was imagining it, that isolation was playing tricks on my mind. But then the dreams started, vivid, wrenching things that left me drenched in sweat. Dreams of running through the woods without a flashlight, barefoot as something chased me with impossibly long strides, always just behind me, breathing down my neck but never catching up. And when I'd wake, there'd be mud on the floor, pine needles in my sheets, and one morning, a single stone from the circle sitting at the foot of my bed like a warning. And I tried to rationalize it, told myself I had sleepwalked, maybe brought it in without knowing. But the cabin was locked from the inside, always, and the windows were sealed shut. And something inside me shifted after that, a kind of dull panic that never fully went away, like the sensation you get when you think someone's watching you but can't find them. And I began noticing carvings on some of the trees, not initials or hearts or anything human, but symbols, spirals, jagged lines, slashes like claws, none of which I could identify, and they weren't there before, I was sure of it. And the worst part was that I began to lose time, whole hours gone, when I thought I'd only been walking for minutes, returning to the cabin to find the sky already dark, my GPS showing paths I didn't take, sometimes ending in places I didn't remember seeing. And the forest seemed to change shape, subtly at first, but then undeniably, paths winding where they never had, landmarks vanishing, the layout mutating like the forest itself was alive. and didn't want to be understood. And that's when I knew this forest wasn't meant to be explored, not in the way people explore places for beauty or for the thrill of discovery, but that it existed to repel, to consume. And the more I pushed into it, the more it pushed back, subtly, cruelly, like a predator toying with its prey, letting me feel safe just long enough to lower my guard. And each night the knocking grew louder, not just at the door but on the windows too, and I stopped answering, stopped checking, but I never covered the windows. I wanted to know if something was out there, even if I was too afraid to face it, because not knowing was worse, far worse. And eventually I stopped hiking entirely, staying inside with the blinds drawn, fire burning even in summer, just to keep that wall of light and warmth between me and whatever waited beyond the tree line. But I could still feel it watching, closer now, so close I could feel its breath fogging the glass, though there was never a mark, never a handprint. And that's when the dreams became memories, at least that's what it felt like. Like I wasn't dreaming at all, but remembering things that never happened to me, rituals performed in the woods by torchlight, figures in robes chanting in tongues, a sacrifice on a stone slab, the earth swallowing blood, the trees leaning in to listen. And every time I woke from those dreams, the forest seemed darker, denser, less like a place and more like a trap that had been sprung long before I ever arrived. And now I'm not sure what's real anymore, whether the cabin is even standing where I think it is, whether the road I drove up on still exists or ever did, and I can't find my way back even if I tried, because I've come to believe the forest won't let me. Not now, not after everything I've seen, and the knocking won't stop, not ever, and when it comes tonight I know something will be different. I know that this time, it won't wait for me to open the door. When the knocking came again that night, it was different, not just louder but purposeful, like the rhythm of it meant something, like it was speaking in a language I wasn't meant to understand. And I lay there frozen in my bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling as each thud rattled the cabin like a heartbeat, steady and patient, as if the thing outside knew I was awake, knew I was listening. And when it finally stopped, the silence it left behind was worse, a thick, humming void that seemed to buzz in my skull and throb beneath my skin. And I didn't sleep that night, or the night after, and time began to blur again, the days losing shape, the sunlight feeling weaker with every dawn, like the sky itself was dimming. And it wasn't long before I stopped checking clocks entirely, because what was the point when time felt so thoroughly broken? And then the forest changed again, or maybe it always had been like this, and I'd only just begun to see it properly, but I started noticing things that defied explanation. Trails that looped into themselves like Mobius strips, birds flying silently with wings too large for their bodies, trees that bled sap so dark and thick it looked like oil, and a smell, faint but unmistakable, like copper and rot, seeping through the cabin walls even when everything was shut tight. And one morning I awoke to find a symbol carved into my door, not by human hands, but etched with such precision and depth it looked grown from the wood itself, spiraling and jagged. And when I touched it, I swore I heard whispering, not from outside but from inside the grain, voices like breathy chants tickling the edge of comprehension, and I recoiled so hard I fell backward and hit my head on the stone fireplace, blacking out for what must have been hours. And when I woke, the symbol was gone. But the echo of those voices remained, gnawing at the back of my skull like a splinter I couldn't dig out. And after that, I couldn't stay indoors anymore. Not fully, because the cabin didn't feel like shelter now. It felt like a trap, like whatever was in the forest had gotten inside, and I started sleeping on the porch, wrapped in blankets with a shotgun across my lap and eyes fixed on the tree line, waiting for something I couldn't name but knew was coming. And the forest just watched, unmoving, as if it were enjoying the slow unraveling of my sanity. And every time I drifted off, I dreamed of roots, thousands of them coiling around my body like snakes, pulling me into the earth while voices chanted in a rhythm that matched the knocking. And always I awoke gasping, with soil under my nails and the taste of moss in my mouth. And I stopped trusting my senses, because things no longer made sense. I'd light a fire and find it smoldering cold moments later. I'd pour myself coffee, and it would turn to sludge before my eyes, books in my bag now full of strange handwritten pages I didn't write. didn't right, and I began to wonder if I'd been in the forest longer than I thought, if days or weeks or even months had passed without my knowing, because the mirror in the bathroom showed a face that looked older, leaner, wild-eyed, with streaks of white. In my beard I didn't remember seeing before, and my phone no longer held a signal. No bars, no time, no date. Just a frozen screen with the forest background photo I'd taken on my first day here. But the trees in the photo were different now, subtly warped, like they were leaning toward the camera, reaching. And then came the voices in the daytime, not just in dreams, soft and melodic, echoing from the trees like songs sung backward. And when I followed them, because I had to, I couldn't not. I'd find myself back at the same place, the circle of stones, except now the ground. Inside it pulsed faintly like a heartbeat, and the stones had grown, visibly now up to my knees, with tiny notches etched into them like teeth. And one day I returned to find bones scattered around the circle, animal, I hoped, but the femur looked human, and I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Couldn't even look at it too long without feeling sick, and the wind carried the scent of iron and ash, and I knew, finally, that this forest didn't just trap people. It fed off them, digested them slowly over days or years, and the ones who vanished never truly left. They became part of it, absorbed into the roots and soil and bark, and that's when the dreams began to include faces, dozens of them, pale and expressionless, peering from behind trees or rising from the ground, their mouths open in silent screams, and I recognized them, hikers from local news reports, missing persons flyers I'd seen, pinned in the gas station by the highway, even one woman I remembered seeing on the trail my second week here, cheerful and waving before vanishing into the trees, and they were all here now, trapped, their souls or echoes or whatever was left of them, and they whispered warnings I couldn't understand, faces twisted in anguish, mouths moving too fast, too slow, out of sync with time itself, and I began to feel them around me even when I was awake, brushing past my shoulders, pressing against my back, and I couldn't take it anymore. I had to leave, had to try, even if the forest didn't want me to, and so I packed a bag with whatever I could carry, compass, canteen, flashlight, notebook, and I left in the early morning before the sun fully rose, hoping to catch the trees unaware. But it didn't work. The compass spun wildly, the GPS refused to lock on, and every path I took curved back to the cabin, no matter how far I walked. No matter how many turns I made, like the forest itself was folding space, playing with geometry in ways I couldn't fathom, and the worst part was that I wasn't alone out there anymore, not in the usual way, but I felt something walking just behind me, always just out of sight. Its steps perfectly matched to mine, so when I stopped, it stopped, and when I turned suddenly, nothing was there, just rustling leaves and the faint echo of breath that wasn't mine. And eventually I gave up and sat down in the clearing, crying for the first time in years, not out of fear but exhaustion, because I finally understood this wasn't a place you left. It was a place that decided when you were done, like a mouth that chewed slowly and patiently. And I must have fallen asleep because when I woke, the forest was darker than night, the trees pressed close like prison bars, and in the distance, I heard the knocking, not on wood but on bone, and I knew I had made a mistake by ever thinking this forest was just a place. I don't remember walking back to the cabin, but at some point I found myself inside again, the door creaking shut. Behind me, without a breeze to move it, the windows all covered in condensation that pulsed like lungs, and the floor beneath my feet felt warm, like something massive had just passed beneath it. And I knew the forest wasn't just alive, it was aware, and it wasn't just outside. Anymore, it had infiltrated this place, slipped through the cracks, coiled into the walls, the air, maybe even me, and every reflection I caught of myself in a window or mirror seemed just a little off, like I was watching someone wear my face too loosely, like the eyes weren't quite centered, like the skin drooped in ways mine never had, and the longer I stared, the more the reflection smiled on its own, and I started to avoid mirrors altogether, choosing instead to light candles and sit in the dimness, whispering nonsense just to fill the silence, because it was in the silence that I heard the breathing, the raspy, wheezing inhales and guttural exhales of something just beyond the walls, sometimes above the roof, sometimes beneath the floor, but always there, surrounding me like a predator, watching its prey learn the limits of the cage, And I didn't sleep anymore, not really, but drifted in and out of hallucinations and memories that were not mine, reliving the last days of others. A woman sobbing by the fireplace, muttering names under her breath until her tongue turned black and fell out. A man scratching equations into the floor until his fingers snapped off one by one. A child curled in the corner, humming a lullaby in reverse, rocking slowly as the shadows swallowed him. And I could feel these people still, their essence soaked into the wood and stone of the cabin, their stories etched into the grain like fossilized screams. And sometimes I'd wake with blood on my hands and not know whose it was, or where I'd gone, or how long I'd been gone, because time didn't obey the same rules here anymore, and I found journals in places I hadn't remembered leaving them. Entries written in my handwriting, but describing events I had no memory of. Entire pages filled with phrases like, "The trees see, and she waits below, and do not answer." The knocking, scrawled in frantic loops that spiraled into nonsense, and I burned one of those journals just to test if they were real, but it didn't burn. It bled thick and black like the sap from the trees, and the fire died instantly, smothered by the smoke that spelled out words in the air I couldn't read, but somehow understood as threats. And that was when the dreams became worse, not of being lost or hunted, but of becoming something else, something with bark instead of skin and hollow eyes full of soil and stars, of walking not through the forest, but as part of it, with roots where bones should be and hunger for voices that didn't yet belong to the woods. And I'd wake with dirt in my teeth and thorns in my palms, and the unmistakable feeling that I'd left the cabin and done things I wasn't meant to remember. And I started seeing her, first in glimpses, the edge of a white dress vanishing behind a tree, long hair made of smoke and shadows, a face just out of focus, but painfully familiar, like something remembered from a nightmare long buried. And then one day she was just standing there in the clearing behind the cabin, unmoving, barefoot, arms at her side, staring at me with eyes that didn't reflect light, and she opened her mouth impossibly wide, wider than any human jaw should allow, and from it came a sound like wind howling through bones, and I heard it inside my head, not through my ears, a scream that bent the air and made my nose bleed, and my teeth ache and the trees sway as if recoiling, and then she was gone, just gone, leaving behind a single perfect feather, black as pitch and warm to the touch, which I later found in my pillow, in my boots, in the fireplace, always appearing when I began to forget her face, and I understood she wasn't part of the forest. She was the forest, its voice, its guardian, or maybe its jailer, and she'd chosen me for something, some ritual or offering or purpose I couldn't comprehend yet. And from that day forward, I stopped trying to leave, not because I didn't want to, but because I finally accepted there was no escape. And all the stories about this place, all the legends about people who vanished, weren't just warnings. They were promises, binding and inevitable. And my only hope was to understand the forest before it consumed me completely. So I began to walk it by day, carving symbols into trees as I went, marking paths, testing boundaries, and I discovered places that didn't exist on maps or logic, a river that flowed in a circle, a cliff that showed a different view every time. I climbed it, a cave that echoed with my own voice begging for help days before I'd spoken the words, and the more I explored, the more I realized this forest wasn't merely twisted in space, it was folded in reality itself, layers of existence stacked like paper, and I was slipping between them without knowing, sometimes waking in different versions of the cabin with slight changes, a different color blanket, a new crack in the wall, food spoiled in one and fresh in another, and I began keeping track with scratches on the wall, only to find new tallies I hadn't made, sometimes erased, sometimes altered to symbols I couldn't decipher, and I found photographs of me I hadn't taken, in places I hadn't been, always looking older, eyes more hollow, mouth fixed in a grimace of realization. And I knew there were others, other versions of me, caught in the same trap, some still fighting, some long since given in, and the forest was feeding off them all, learning from each iteration, adapting to our thoughts and fears like a predator, learning its prey's behavior. And worst of all, I started seeing people I knew were dead. My father, who'd vanished on a solo hike when I was 13, his beard grey and eyes vacant as he stood just out of reach, silently watching. My childhood dog, limping and eyeless, but wagging its tail. Even old friends. I hadn't seen in years, all of them twisted slightly, smiles too wide, eyes too dull, like puppets wearing memories. And when I approached them, they'd vanish, leaving behind the faint scent of pine and something metallic, and I began to understand that memory was the currency here. The forest used it, stole it, traded in it, grew fat on it, and I started forgetting things, names, faces, the sound of my mother's voice, the taste of real food, the warmth of sunlight not filtered through an oppressive canopy, and I tried to fight it, to write everything down. But even my notes faded, ink running like tears across the page until only symbols remained, and then even those began to shift, reconfiguring into spirals and glyphs that moved when I wasn't looking, and I realized I hadn't heard a bird or insect in weeks, just the hum, the ever-present hum of the forest, like a chorus of roots whispering secrets beneath the ground, and I knew it was only a matter of time before I either became one of the lost or something worse, and in that moment of despair I heard her again, closer now, whispering my name not from the woods, but from inside the cabin, inside me. And I finally understood. She wasn't calling me deeper into the forest. She was waking me up to what I truly was. There's a particular moment I keep replaying in my mind, if that's even what I still have, a mind. And it wasn't the first time I saw her, or the day I realized I could no longer tell how many days had passed, but that quiet, shivering instant when I found a photograph nailed to the cabin door with my own face scratched out, not crossed over in a messy panic like some old horror trope, but delicately removed, as if someone had taken the time to carve my likeness away with precision, leaving only an empty oval in its place, and taped below it, in handwriting identical to mine, was a sentence that read, "The forest remembers better than you ever will." And I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the hole where my face should have been, and I swear it shifted when I blinked, like it was hungry to reattach to me, like it was tethered across time waiting for a signal, and I began to feel like I wasn't just a person anymore. I was a placeholder, a vessel the forest was filling with whatever story it needed next, and every time I walked into the trees, I felt parts of myself sloughing off like old bark, replaced by fragments of other lives, other memories, not even human ones sometimes, like I could remember the way moss feels when it spreads over a rock, the thirst of roots in drought, the ache of wind slicing through leafless branches in winter, and the worst of it was how comforting it had started to feel, how right, how natural, and that was the beginning of what I now call the displacement phase, because that's when time stopped being linear entirely, and I began to lose track not just of the day, but of where I was in my own story. And I'd wake up inside different seasons, snow falling on my blanket in a summer month, insects buzzing, from underground in a midwinter cabin, and the forest didn't seem to care about continuity anymore. It had begun bending around me, showing me things out of sequence, like a book someone had ripped apart and reassembled by blind instinct. And it was during this phase that I stumbled across what I first thought was another hiker's camp, but quickly realized was my own, an exact replica of the fire pit I'd built, the log I sat on to eat, the half-burnt journal I'd thrown away. In a rage, all of it laid out in a clearing that should have been miles away, and when I stepped closer I saw myself sitting there, or something shaped like me, the same clothes, same posture, and it was humming the song my mother used to sing. And I don't even remember how I approached. Maybe I didn't, maybe the forest pushed me, but I blinked and it was gone, leaving behind a single pine cone soaked in blood and twitching slightly as if it were alive. And from that day onward, I was never entirely sure when I was awake or dreaming, because the forest stopped bothering to separate the two for me, and one morning I opened my eyes to find the trees had grown into the cabin, thick roots piercing the ceiling like ribs and bark sliding down the walls like melting wax, and the fireplace flickered with a flame that didn't cast shadows but absorbed them, and I heard voices in the fire, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all speaking at once, languages I didn't recognize but understood anyway, and they told me stories, not warnings this time, but tales of others like me who had come here searching for something. Silence, escape, truth, death, and every story ended the same. with the forest claiming them, not out of hunger or malice, but because that's what the forest does. It assimilates, it learns, it rewrites, and they said I had lasted longer than most, but not by much. And they said she had chosen me because I was empty enough to fill and stubborn enough to survive the rewriting process. And that was when I found the library, hidden inside a tree with a hollow wide enough to crawl into, and inside was an impossible space filled with books made of flesh and bark and stitched together memories. And I found my name on the spine of at least 6 of them, all different volumes, and when I opened one, I watched my life play out in third person, narrated in a voice that wasn't mine but somehow was. And it ended with me digging into the earth with my bare hands until my fingernails snapped off, and my eyes rolled back into my skull, and I closed the book and screamed, but no sound came out because there was no air in the library, only stories, only breathless silence, and I crawled out gasping, covered in ink and dirt. And I knew then that I wasn't meant to read the story. I was meant to finish writing it, but not with words, with choices, with sacrifices. And that's when I understood the true cruelty of the forest. It doesn't kill you, not really. It makes you choose how you're going to live inside it, what form your madness will take, what illusions you'll cling to in the final days. And I started seeing the paths more clearly then, not physical ones, but narrative ones. Little threads of possibility stretching out before me like veins, and I realized I could feel the weight of each one, the ones that would lead to my transformation into something else, the ones that would lead me deeper into the forest's layers, and the ones that would end abruptly, sometimes violently, and I felt drawn to the longest one, the thread that pulsed with the weight of an ending so massive it bent all the others toward it, and I followed it. Not with my feet, but with my mind, surrendering pieces of myself along the way. My birthday, the name of my first love, the memory of my father's voice, and each loss made the thread brighter, easier to track, and I walked for what felt like years across landscapes that changed mid-step, deserts blooming into forests, mountains flattening into swamps, and eventually I came to a place where the trees grew upside down, roots clawing at the sky, and the ground was made of teeth, hundreds of thousands of them, human and animal and unidentifiable, clicking softly as I walked, and there she was again, the woman in white, standing among the trees. But this time, she wasn't watching. She was weeping, and her tears burned holes into the ground, and I saw in her eyes the same fear I carried, and I knew then that she wasn't the forest's master. She was its prisoner, its original storyteller, the first to dream it into being, and she had been trapped here by the weight of her own creation, and I was her chance at freedom, not by saving her, but by taking her place, by becoming the next voice, the next myth. And she opened her mouth to speak, and this time I understood every word. When she opened her mouth and the words finally came out, they weren't really spoken in any way a person speaks. They didn't pass through air or sound, but rather through memory and marrow. A vibration that started in my spine and radiated out through my skin, like every pore was a mouth repeating what she meant, not what she said. And what she meant was, "This, you are the last tether," and I felt my bones understand before my mind could. Like something ancient inside me had been waiting to hear those words, since the first time I ever looked into the woods behind my childhood home. And the moment they reached me fully, everything inside me rearranged, not physically, not entirely, but something subtle and permanent, like the sensation of a scar healing over a memory. And I watched as she dissolved, not like a ghost or a fading echo, but like a paper burned in reverse, her ashes reforming into leaves, her bones into roots, and her face into the bark of the nearest tree. And the tree groaned in relief, as though it had finally taken her pain into itself after centuries of separation, and I dropped to my knees on the teeth-covered ground, no longer afraid of the sharp points or the whispering enamel below me, because the forest had stopped being a threat. It had become a language, and I was finally fluent. And the realization hit me with such ferocity that I felt myself fragment into pieces, my memories scattering across the forest like dandelion seeds in a windstorm, and I could feel them planting themselves into the dirt, embedding into trunks hiding in moss, and the forest took them like offerings, catalogued them, preserved them in roots and dew and decay, and from that point forward, Everything I did felt predetermined yet necessary, like reading a sentence you've read 1,000 times but still needing to get to the end to remember why it matters. And I walked without direction, not because I was lost, but because direction was irrelevant now, and the forest moved around me, shifting paths and distances like a dream that refused to stay still. And I stumbled upon a clearing that hummed with silence so thick it pulsed, and in the center of it stood a door, not a building, just the door, freestanding, carved with symbols that shifted when I tried to focus on them, and without thinking, I opened it and stepped through into what I can only describe as an echo of the cabin I had first rented months ago, but older, more alive, as if time had sunk its teeth into every board and beam, and I realized this was not the past or a replica, but a convergence point, a crossroads of all the timelines and versions of me that had ever existed inside the forest. And I saw them, my other selves. Flashes of faces staring back at me from the cabin's darkened corners, each one holding a different expression. Terror, peace, madness, rage, wonder, and I felt them flicker through me like static, each one a possible future or past, and in the center of the room stood a table with a single object on it, a lantern, the same one I had dropped on my first night here when I ran from the whispering woman, and it was lit, glowing with a flame that danced like it was alive, and as I approached, the room shrank not in size but in possibility, collapsing all the versions of me into one until I was the only one left. And when I picked up the lantern, the light spilled out across the floor and revealed carvings I hadn't noticed, thousands of names etched into the wood, some in English, some in languages I didn't recognize, and among them was my name over and over again, scratched into the floor like it had been written every time I had looped through this place, and suddenly I knew. I wasn't the first me to come. Here I was just the first to remember, and maybe, just maybe, the first to get this far, and the weight of that nearly broke me. Not out of fear, but from the sheer density of fate, the claustrophobia of inevitability, and I stepped out of the cabin, carrying the lantern and the forest, was waiting, silent and expectant, like a stage before the play begins, and I walked deeper than I ever had before, following a path that revealed itself only as I moved forward, and each step felt like writing a word I couldn't take back, and the trees around me grew taller, not just in height but in presence, their bark covered in faces that whispered truths and lies alike, and the ground pulsed with heat, veins of glowing fungus mapping out roots like nervous systems beneath the soil, and I came to a river I had never seen on any map, its water black as ink and thick like syrup, and something inside me told me I had to cross it, not because it led somewhere, but because it marked a point of no return, and I waded in, the cold sinking into my bones like a second skeleton forming beneath my skin, and halfway across I felt the forest testing me, sending visions, my family crying out for me, the woman in white reaching for me again, my own body lying dead on a forest floor I didn't recognize, and I kept walking, eyes forward, because I knew now that the forest fed on fear but respected will, and when I stepped out on the other side, I wasn't wet, not even chilled, and I realized I hadn't crossed the river. I had passed through a memory of it, or a metaphor of some kind, and the trail beyond was different, no longer dirt or root but smooth stone, like something ancient had paved this place, and I followed it into a cavern whose walls glowed with the same light as the lantern, and deep inside I found a mirror, not made of glass, but of water held, perfectly still, suspended in air, and when I looked into it I saw not myself but the forest looking back, its eyes where mine should be, its branches reaching from my spine, and I knew then that I was no longer just a man in the woods. I was part of the woods themselves, the narrator of its newest chapter, the guardian of the path for whoever came next, and the voice that had whispered to me that first night now spoke clearly, inside me as me, and it said only this: "Welcome home." The forest did not let me rest, not because it was cruel, but because it had waited too long, endured too much silence, too much forgetting, and now that I was awake inside it, truly awake, it demanded I keep moving, keep uncovering, keep remembering. And so I walked, days, weeks maybe. It's hard to tell anymore because time bends here like bark in a storm, and hunger no longer gnawed at me, thirst no longer blistered my tongue, and I didn't sleep so much as I slipped into echoes, curling up inside moments I'd already lived or hadn't yet reached. Like memory had become my bed and regret my blanket, and the forest accepted me in ways it had denied others, letting me see beyond the veil of bark and branch, whispering, not just in sounds but in patterns, in flickering light, in the blood of berries that bled like wounds when crushed. And eventually I came to a place the forest had hidden even from itself, a place behind a curtain of hanging moss so thick it dripped with dew like tears, and when I passed through, I found a circle of stones carved with languages I had never seen, but somehow understood, each one a name, not of people but of memories, because here the forest stored not the dead but the forgotten, and they waited, half-formed and trembling, like shadows trying to remember how to be solid, and one of them turned to me, a boy no older than 10 with hollow eyes and a mouth stitched shut with vines, and he reached out and pressed a hand to my chest, and suddenly I saw what he saw. A man running through these woods long before me, dragging chains behind him, pursued by shadows with wings made of knives, and the boy had watched, powerless, until the forest absorbed the man whole and all. That remained were his screams woven into the wind, and I stumbled back choking on air that wasn't mine, because his memory had entered me like smoke enters lungs, uninvited and impossible to remove, and I saw now what the forest wanted, from me not just to remember, but to bear witness, to become the vessel for all the pieces too broken to carry themselves, and I fell to my knees as more of the forgotten came forward, each one brushing against me, passing their fragments into my soul like hands tossing embers into a fire, and I burned. God, I burned, not with pain, but with presence, with knowing, with the sheer unbearable weight of everything lost. And when the last one touched me, a woman with no eyes and hair like unraveling rope, she whispered a single word into my ear, a word I can't pronounce but can feel in every heartbeat since, and with it came a new awareness. The forest wasn't just alive, it was mourning, and I was its mourner, its priest, its final confession, and I stood, weak but fuller than I had ever been, and continued walking, the ground shifting under me like it was remembering its own shape, and the trees began to change, growing closer together, their bark blackened, their leaves colorless, and I understood I was entering the forest's heart, not the center, but its soul, the place it kept locked away even from itself. And the air grew heavy, filled with the scent of rot and rain and old blood, and I saw things moving between the trees, limbs too long, heads too tilted, eyes too still, and they did not attack or speak, but simply watched. Guardians or perhaps prisoners, reflections of sins no longer named, and finally I reached it. The tree, capital T, because it was not a tree in the normal sense, but the tree, the first, the last, the one all others were echoes of, and its trunk was so wide I could not see its edges, its bark cracked and pulsing like skin, and in its base was a door, no handle, no hinges, just an outline of light that pulsed with the rhythm of my heart. And when I touched it, it opened inward, revealing not roots or wood, but a staircase spiraling down into blackness that swallowed sound and thought alike. And I descended, each step echoing like a memory hitting the bottom of a well, and the deeper I went, the more I forgot, my name, my age, the sound of my mother's voice, until I was nothing but breath and skin and will, and when I reached the bottom, there was no floor, only water, still and dark and perfect, and in it I saw myself, but not as I was, rather as I might be or had been, covered in bark, my eyes glowing like lanterns, my veins filled with sap. And I understood then that this was the final choice, the moment the forest offered itself to me not just as a host but as a home, a permanence, a forever, and I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't, because deep down I had always wanted this, even before I knew it existed. And so I stepped into the water and let it climb my body, let it invade every pore and memory, and cell, and as it reached my mouth I opened it, not to breathe but to accept. And the water entered and didn't drown me. It sang of roots and cycles and birth and death, and when it receded I was still me, but more a version of myself threaded with soil and time, and I rose, not walking but growing, the staircase gone, the chamber above me cracked open like a skull, letting in light that didn't belong to the sun, and I emerged back into the forest to find it waiting, bowing almost, its branches dipped low in respect or welcome or mourning. And I walked through it, and wherever I passed the trees parted, the creatures stilled, the wind held its breath, and I reached the cabin once again. Only now it was different, older than before, older than time, and inside it sat someone. Me. Or a version of me, a future me, a past me, it doesn't matter. He looked up and smiled, then nodded and vanished into ash, and I sat in his place, and the forest pulsed once, twice, and then was silent, and I realized what had happened. The forest had accepted me, absorbed me, made me part of its will, and I knew now why no one returned from here, why maps failed, why time twisted. Time twisted. Because this place was never meant to be visited, only inherited, and I had just become its heir. The days no longer passed, or if they did so in secret, hiding their footprints beneath leaves that never decayed, beneath skies that no longer turned to dusk. And though I sat inside what had once been my cabin, I now understood it was no longer a structure but a seed, and I was not a man anymore, but its root, a vessel through which the forest poured not just its memories, but its intentions. And as I sat, unmoving, unblinking, I began to notice things I had not before. The low hum in the floorboards that wasn't wood creaking, but breath being exhaled. The shifting pattern of grain on the walls that told stories when stared at long enough. And the smell, oh the smell, not of rot, but of wet stone and marrow, like the scent left after bones are boiled clean. And in that scent were messages too, old for language, instructions etched into instinct, and I followed them, not with my limbs, for they had grown numb beneath me, fused to the chair now as if bark had crept from the legs and embraced my thighs in quiet possession, but with my mind, which floated free, soaring beyond the roof, through the leaves, into the canopy, and there I saw the forest from above for the first time, not as trees and soil, but as a body, a living, pulsing intelligence whose veins ran deeper than any river, whose heart beat beneath layers of time and ruin, and in its breath I saw faces, thousands of them, pressed into bark, eyes open, mouths frozen in screams or whispers or both, and I understood that they were the ones who had come before me, who had wandered too deep, who had heard the call and answered it, and now lived as the forest within it, as it, and I was next, not chosen but required, not welcomed but absorbed, and though I should have felt fear, I only felt peace, the kind that comes not from joy but from finality, like the quiet that settles after the last page is turned. And yet, something stirred in me still, a sliver of self, a shard of resistance buried so deep it had not yet been digested, and it whispered a single question. What lies beneath the root? At the moment the question formed, the forest flinched, barely perceptible, like a ripple in still water. But I felt it, and I seized upon it, leaning forward with all the will I had left, not with muscles, but with memory, with identity. And the cabin responded, groaning as if awoken from a long slumber, and the floor beneath me cracked, not with destruction but with invitation, and I slid downward, not falling but being pulled, deeper than the stairs beneath the tree, deeper than the forgotten clearing, into a place the forest had not shown anyone in centuries, perhaps ever. And as I descended, the air changed, became dense and mineral, tasting of copper and grief, and when I landed it was in a room not made of wood but of bone, enormous bones stacked and shaped into arches and pathways, and on every surface were carvings, not of people but of forests, forests dying, forests burning, forests swallowed by cities and salt, and in the center of the room sat a stone table, and on it a single object, a mask ancient and cracked, made of bark and ivory. And though I had never seen it, I knew it was mine, had always been mine, and when I picked it up, the room shifted, the bones shuddering as if sighing in relief or dread, and I placed the mask upon my face, and the world collapsed, not in pain, but in transition, folding inside itself like a seed becoming a sprout. And suddenly, I was everywhere. Every tree, every leaf, every buried root, and I could see the entire forest at once, its joy and its terror, its hunger and its memory, and in the center of it all, a shape I could not understand, something vast and still and waiting, like a question that had never been asked. And I knew it was what the forest feared, The reason it clung to memory so desperately. This thing, this presence beneath everything, was the antithesis of growth, a consuming silence that wanted not to kill the forest, but to make it irrelevant, to erase even the idea of wilderness. And I knew then that my role was not merely to inherit the forest's past, but to defend its future, to stand against the great forgetting, the flattening of nature into symbol, and the mask tightened on my face, sinking into my skin, not as punishment but as transformation. And I rose, no longer tethered by form, and I walked the corridors of bone, each step rewriting the rules of this place. And when I emerged back into the cabin, it too had changed, grown taller, darker, the windows now eyes, the chimney a mouth, and outside the trees bowed not in submission but in solidarity. And I stepped out and raised my hand, and the forest responded, not with sound, but with vibration, a deep, resonant pulse that echoed through soil and soul, and I knew that the thing beneath, the presence the forest feared, had felt it too, had noticed me now, and it would come, perhaps not today, perhaps not for centuries, but it would come. And when it did, I would be ready. For I was no longer a man, not even a spirit, but something else, something new, something born of bark and blood and memory, and I smiled not with lips but with canopy and wind, and the forest smiled with me. I didn't know how much time had passed, not because I had lost track, but because time itself had stopped making sense. The forest, no, the realm I had entered, had broken the rules of reality, and in doing so I had lost my understanding of what was real. I no longer slept or ate, not in the ways I remembered. My body had become a part of this place, like a new root branching into an ancient, endless system of growth, decay, and rebirth. The old familiar sensations were slipping away, replaced by something much more primal, something old enough to be feared. The cabin had become my anchor, though it was no longer the home it once was. It was something more, something symbolic. It pulsed with the heartbeat of the earth itself, vibrating with the ancient energy that had taken root in its foundation. When I walked its halls, I didn't feel its wooden walls or its rusted metal appliances. I felt the beating of a deeper heart, the heart of the forest, the heart of the world, and maybe something older still, something older than the land itself. I spent my days now in a state of half-consciousness, caught between worlds, only returning to the cabin to rest or to seek a kind of peace that never truly settled. My thoughts were fractured, scattered. Like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't sure how to assemble anymore, and the longer I stayed here, the more I lost touch with who I had been. Who had I been, really? Was I the man who had walked into these woods so many weeks ago, filled with curiosity and desire? Or had I already been overtaken, consumed by something older, something that had been waiting for me, waiting for someone like me to come, to be lost, to be absorbed into this terrible, beautiful living thing? The forest knew the answer, I realized, but it wouldn't give it to me yet. Not until I had learned to truly see, to understand the lesson that it was offering. My presence here wasn't random, and neither had the events that led me here been coincidence. There was a pattern, a series of markers placed in my path, guiding me here like breadcrumbs, and I was meant to follow them. I had been brought to this place for a purpose, but what was it? I felt it in my bones. I was being tested. The deeper I wandered, the more I came to understand that the forest wasn't just a place. It was a creature, a thing of living memories, and it had its own desires, its own secrets, its own reasons for taking people like me. I had stumbled into something far beyond what I had ever imagined. I had assumed it was simply an ancient, uncaring wilderness, a place that had grown too wild for civilization, but the truth was much darker than that. The forest wasn't wild. It was alive in a way that defied understanding. It breathed, it moved, it watched, and it fed. It had no use for civilization or its rules. It thrived on mystery and fear, on the whispered secrets of those who had ventured too far into its depths and disappeared without a trace. It kept its memories not in books or stones, but in the very fabric of the earth itself, and it didn't forget. I had begun to understand this as I spent more time in the heart of the forest, and the realization was a heavy one. The forest was not a natural thing. It was a force of nature, a force that existed outside the cycle of life and death. Its roots ran deeper than anyone could imagine, not just into the earth, but into the fabric of time itself. The more I let myself connect with it, the more I felt the weight of its history pressing in on me. I began to see things, visions, whispers in the wind, flashes of images in the corners of my eyes that weren't meant for my mind to comprehend. I saw the beginnings of the forest, ancient creatures that had long since vanished from the world. I saw the way the land had been carved and shaped by forces too powerful for human hands, and I saw the blood that had been spilled to shape this cursed place. I wasn't just in a forest anymore. I was in a living memory, a place where the past and present bled together in a single, horrific moment. And the more I tried to understand, the more I realized I couldn't escape it. There was no way out, no way back to the person I had been before. I had become a part of it now, inextricably bound to it in a way that defied reason. I had been consumed by the forest, and there was no escape. The trees whispered, their branches creaking as if speaking to one another in some ancient tongue I couldn't grasp. The wind shifted, carrying with it a familiar yet foreign scent, a scent of damp earth, of rotting leaves, of things that were long forgotten. The forest was alive, and it was watching me, and I could feel it. It growing stronger, feeding off my confusion, feeding off my fear. It wanted me, just as it had wanted every other soul that had ever stumbled upon its path. I had heard stories of people getting lost in forests, never to be seen again, but I hadn't believed them. I hadn't believed the warnings. But now I understood. Now I felt the presence of the forest in my bones. I could feel it inside me, wrapping around my soul like a thick, choking vine. And I knew deep down that there was no way to escape. I was already part of it. The forest had claimed me, just as it had claimed those before me. There was no turning back, no rescue, no salvation. Only the eternal pulse of the earth, the hum of life and death woven into the fabric of the trees, and the whisper of the wind telling me that I had become one of its many, many secrets. Time had no meaning anymore. Days bled together like watercolor, the edges fading into one another, the bright colors of noon merging with the dark hues of twilight, until the very concept of light and dark ceased to matter. My eyes were no longer accustomed to the sun, for I rarely saw it anymore. The forest had become my entire existence, its shadows my constant companion, and the damp smell of its undergrowth filled my lungs like a second breath. I could no longer recall the last time I'd felt hunger or thirst in the way I once knew them. I didn't need food, nor did I crave sleep. I existed, nothing more, nothing less. My body, though still a body, had become a vessel for the forest itself. Every fiber of my being was attuned to the pulse of the ancient trees and the slow churn of the soil beneath my feet. The wind had a voice now, and I listened to it, the constant rustle of the leaves speaking to me, each gust laden with forgotten truths, with warnings, with demands. I had no sense of where I was anymore, or if I was even in a place at all. It was as though the earth beneath me had shifted, pulling me into an eternal twilight that existed outside of time. The forest had taken me far beyond the cabin now, far beyond the clearing where I had first entered its embrace, and what I saw before me, what I felt, was nothing like anything I had experienced in the world I once knew. Before, there had been paths, roads, markers that guided me. Now there was nothing but the twisting, ancient expanse of roots, trunks and branches, all growing in unnatural patterns that seemed to shift as I moved through them. The trees no longer stood like soldiers in a row. They leaned toward me, their trunks contorting in strange angles, their roots curling beneath the earth as though they were preparing to rise up. I could feel them watching, waiting. I could feel their eyes, though they did not have eyes in the traditional sense. They saw me, I knew that now. I had become the subject of their interest, the thing they were gathering to observe, and I could not look away. The air was thick, heavy with something more than just moisture. It was full of intention, full of purpose, as if every molecule was focused on me, every breath of wind eager to show me something, to tell me something. And in the silence between the trees, I heard something, a voice, soft, but so clear that it cut through my thoughts like a knife through paper. It whispered to me a language I didn't understand, but that I instinctively knew was mine, a language older than anything I'd ever learned, older than human speech. It was a call, a beckoning, but not for me to come forward. It was a warning. It was telling me not to proceed, telling me that the path ahead was not meant for anyone, that those who sought it would only find ruin. But I couldn't stop myself. I had come too far, seen too much. The forest had already claimed me, whether I liked it or not, and I felt that strange pull in my chest, that unyielding, inevitable draw toward the heart of it. I had heard the stories, the legends passed down through generations, that the forest was alive, but I had never believed them, not truly. But now, standing in the thick of it, I could see the truth in every twisted root, in every gnarled branch that clawed toward the sky. This was no ordinary place. It was something more, something that had always been, something that predated the humans who had ventured into it. And I was nothing more than a passing moment in its endless cycle. The sound of the wind picked up, again rising from a whisper to a deafening roar, and in that sound I thought I heard the names of those who had come before me. There were more now, more voices in the wind, joining the chorus that had once been silent, now crying out from the trees, from the earth itself. Their whispers wrapped around my mind, like threads tightening, pulling me further into the forest's depths. I tried to resist. I wanted to turn back. I wanted to run, to flee. But the forest was no longer something I could simply leave. It had me now, fully and completely. It was in my blood, in my bones, and every step I took forward seemed to feed it, to strengthen it. The trees were not just trees. They were memory. They were purpose. They were the ancient consciousness of something much older than me, than humanity itself. And that purpose, that consciousness, was moving closer, wrapping around me like a cloak, like a noose, pulling me down into the dark heart of the forest. I could feel it now, its presence closing in, growing stronger, the very ground beneath me trembling as though it were waking, as though it had been dormant for far too long. And now it was ready. Ready for what? I couldn't answer that. But I knew deep down that I was going to find out. There was no escape, not anymore. My steps were no longer my own. The forest had taken control, and when I reached the center, when I reached the source of this terrible power, I would understand. I would finally see what it had been hiding from me all this time. It was not just the forest itself that I feared. It was what lay beneath it. The truth that the trees had been keeping hidden, the thing they had been waiting for, the thing they had been preparing for me to uncover. And when I finally reached that place, when I finally discovered what was buried deep within the earth, I would be changed. Forever. The forest would not let me leave. I had become a part of it now, and it would never let me go. By now, the very air around me had changed. It was thick, laden with the smell of wet moss and decaying leaves, but underneath it, something sharper, more metallic, seeped into my senses. The forest itself was breathing, exhaling a humid mist that clung to everything like a heavy, damp shroud. The trees, once familiar and comforting in their natural forms, now felt like towering sentinels, looming above me with malevolent intent. Their branches creaking in the wind as if whispering ancient, forgotten languages, secrets too old for humans to comprehend. Each step I took sent vibrations through the ground, ripples that disturbed the thick silence around me. I felt as though I was walking through a living nightmare, each breath drawn from the very lungs of the earth itself. My body was no longer my own. It had become a part of the forest, a vessel, a conduit through which the forest's will was exerting itself. I had stopped trying to run, stopped trying to understand what was happening. The need for answers had long since abandoned me. Now all I could do was follow the path the forest had carved out for me. My thoughts were clouded, heavy with an overwhelming sense of dread. Yet there was something else, something strange, a sense of inevitability. I knew, deep within me, that I was nearing something, the heart of this ancient thing, the source of its power. The energy around me was palpable now, the air charged with an unnatural force, as though I were standing at the threshold of something that had always been there, waiting for someone foolish enough to come close. I could feel it, the pull, like a magnetic force drawing me in, guiding me deeper into the woods. The deeper I ventured, the more I began to hear things, scratching noises from the underbrush, whispers carried on the wind, But no matter how hard I tried to focus on them, they remained just out of reach. The sounds were maddening, scratching at the edge of my consciousness, clawing at my sanity like the branches of the trees, reaching out to grab me. My heart raced as I tried to convince myself to turn back, to run, but I couldn't. My legs moved of their own accord, carried forward by an unseen force. The sky above had darkened, though I couldn't say how long I had been walking. The light seemed to bleed out of the world, and what was once familiar, what was once comforting, had become strange, alien. The trees that had once been tall and sturdy now seemed hunched and gnarled, their bark twisted into grotesque patterns that seemed to pulse with life. The very ground beneath me seemed to shift, like it was alive. Every step felt like it was dragging me deeper into the heart of the forest, deeper into whatever it was that lived at its center. I had seen no signs of wildlife for hours, no birds, no small creatures scurrying across the ground. It was as if the forest had swallowed them up, consumed them, and left only the trees and the quiet, oppressive stillness. The silence pressed down on me, thick as a blanket, suffocating in its intensity. My mind was screaming at me to turn back, to break free from this trance-like state I had fallen into, but the pull was too strong. The forest had me now, and I was its prisoner, trapped in its unyielding grip. I stumbled over a root, nearly falling to the ground, but I caught myself just in time. I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop. I couldn't break free from the relentless draw of the forest. The air had become heavy with an unseen presence, a thick, suffocating energy that seemed to radiate from the ground itself. It was as though the very soil had absorbed the fears and pain of those who had come before me, those who had entered the forest and never returned. I could feel it, their presence, the lingering traces of their terror, like a thick fog that clung to the trees. The forest had a memory, and it remembered every soul it had claimed. I had read the stories, heard the warnings about people who went into the woods, only to vanish without a trace. But I never thought it would happen to me. I was smarter than that. Or so I thought. Now, as I walked deeper into the shadows of the trees, I realized the truth. The forest didn't just take people, it consumed them, absorbed them into its very being. It was a predator, and I was nothing more than its prey. The thought sent a chill down my spine, but there was no turning back. I was too far in now. I had to know. I had to understand what was at the center of this place. The forest had been waiting for someone like me, someone willing to venture past the boundaries of reason and enter its depths where no one else had dared to go. And now the forest had me in its grasp. The path ahead was clear now, almost as if the trees had shifted to reveal it, an open space that had been hidden from my view. My pulse quickened as I took the first few steps forward, my feet sinking slightly into the damp earth, the weight of each movement heavy with anticipation. The air had grown colder, the mist now clinging to my skin like an icy breath. I had reached the center, the heart of the forest, and as I stepped into that open space, the earth beneath me seemed to groan, a low, mournful sound that echoed through the trees. The world around me felt like it was closing in, the sky dimming even further, until the very light seemed to retreat into the shadows. I could see it now, a clearing, large and unsettling, surrounded by gnarled trees whose twisted branches hung low, their roots visibly writhing beneath the earth. The air was still here, almost too still, and the space before me felt wrong, unnatural. Something was waiting for me. I could feel it, the weight of its presence pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. The trees had not only surrounded me, they had closed in, hemming me into this terrible place. I was trapped, and as I stood there, frozen in place, I felt the presence of something ancient, something vast, something that had been waiting for me. The forest had no interest in letting me go, not anymore. The stillness of the clearing was unnerving. It was as if time itself had frozen and the forest around me had ceased to exist, yet I could feel its heartbeat deep beneath the earth, pulsing through the soil, through my own veins. I was no longer sure where the forest ended and I began. The boundary between man and nature had blurred to the point of non-existence, and I felt the terrifying truth seeping into me. The trees, gnarled and twisted like ancient sentinels, loomed. Above, their roots exposed like fingers reaching from the dark depths of the earth. The ground was uneven here, marked by deep cracks that ran like veins through the soil, as though the land itself were alive and breathing. Every sound felt distorted, even the wind as it whispered through the canopy above. I heard the rustling, but it didn't come from the branches. It came from deep within the earth, from the cracks in the soil, from the very depths of this accursed place. It was a sound I had never heard before, a groaning, a rumbling that spoke of something far more ancient than even the oldest trees could recall. The energy here was palpable, something that reached out to touch me, to caress my skin with, a coldness that I could feel beneath my flesh. My heart raced in my chest, but my legs, no longer my own, carried me forward deeper into the clearing. The closer I got to the center, the more intense the pressure became. It felt as if the air itself was pushing me down, forcing me to submit to whatever waited for me in the heart of the forest. The trees encircled me, closing in with each step, the roots beneath my feet now forming a thick web, a living labyrinth that was keeping me tethered here, locked in place. My mind was a jumble of confusion, the voices from the wind growing louder, now no longer whispers but distinct murmurs, words that I couldn't understand, but somehow knew to be ancient incantations, the language of the forest, of the earth itself. The weight of their meaning pressed on my thoughts, urging me forward, urging me to listen, to understand, to know what had been hidden here for centuries. And as I reached the center of the clearing, the air seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. The ground before me buckled, like it was about to give way, and suddenly the earth split open with a terrifying crack. My breath caught in my throat as I stumbled back, my heart thudding in my chest. From the depths of the split, a dark shape began to emerge slowly, agonizingly, like something that had been trapped beneath the earth for centuries. The ground trembled with every movement, and I could feel the earth beneath me shift, as if it were preparing to swallow me whole. The dark shape rose higher, and as it emerged fully from the earth, I saw it. A figure cloaked in shadow, its form indistinguishable from the darkness that enveloped it. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, its presence undeniable, suffocating. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. Its form seemed to shimmer, shifting and changing with each passing second, a constant distortion of reality itself. There were no eyes, no visible features to define it, only the impression of something ancient, something beyond understanding, something that had existed long before humanity had learned to speak its name. It was the forest, the embodiment of the land itself. It was the ancient spirit of the trees, of the roots, of the earth beneath my feet. And it was here, in front of me, demanding my attention, my submission. I froze, my body unable to move, my mind locked in terror, and the thing before me reached out with a single hand, its fingers long and skeletal, stretching out like branches, like roots, reaching for me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my voice was lost, my body paralyzed by the sheer weight of its presence. It was as if the very air had been thickened with its power, suffocating me, rendering me incapable of anything but standing there, waiting for whatever was to come. And then, as the figure's hand neared me, I felt it, a surge like an electric current coursing through me, from the very tips of my fingers to the soles of my feet. It wasn't painful, not exactly, but it was invasive. Invasive in a way that cut through me like a blade, reaching into my core, into my mind. It spoke then, not with words but with thoughts. It was the forest, its voice reverberating through the earth, through the trees, through my very soul. "You sought knowledge," it said, its voice a low, reverberating hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "And now you will understand the price of that knowledge." The words burned in my mind, their meaning impossible to ignore, impossible to escape. I had come here seeking answers, seeking to understand the force that had drawn me into the forest's depths. But now that I was here, I realized the terrible truth. The forest had never wanted me to understand. It had never wanted anyone to know the truth. The truth was not meant for humans. It was not meant for those who dared to trespass into this ancient place. The price of knowledge was too steep, too horrific to bear. The figure before me tilted its head, as though studying me, measuring me, and I felt its gaze piercing through me, through every thought, every memory, until there was nothing left of who I had been. I was no longer a man. I was no longer a person. I was just another part of the forest, another thread woven into the fabric of this ancient, unyielding land. And as the figure reached out toward me, its fingers brushing my skin, I felt myself sinking into it. My body, my mind, my soul, all of it was being absorbed, becoming one with the earth, becoming one with the forest that had claimed me. There was no escape. There was no return. And as the darkness enveloped me, as the earth closed in around me, I knew that I would never leave this place. I had been chosen. I had been taken by the forest, and I would remain here forever. I would become part of the trees, part of the roots, part of the ancient spirit that had watched over this land for centuries. And in time, my own whispers would join the others, carried on the wind, lost to the world, but never forgotten by the forest. Time ceased to hold any meaning. I could no longer differentiate between past and present, between moments of clarity and the creeping madness that had taken hold of my mind. My body had become nothing more than an extension of the earth, a part of something far older than anything I could comprehend. I felt my senses dull, as though my very existence was being chipped away piece by piece, like a stone being worn down by the relentless flow of a river. The figure, the embodiment of the forest's power, had faded into the earth, its touch still lingering on my skin, its presence embedded in the marrow of my bones. I was lost, adrift in the quiet depths of this eternal night. The forest stretched on, vast and unyielding, an endless expanse of ancient trees and dark shadows. There were no longer any paths, no signs of direction, no indication that there had ever been a world beyond the trees. I was suspended in this place, this liminal space, trapped between the living and the dead, between consciousness and oblivion. And yet I could still hear them, the voices, not just the whispers, not just the echoes of the forest's ancient spirit, but the voices of others who had been here before, trapped like me, lost like me, their souls twisted into the very fabric of the land. Their voices were faint at first, soft murmurs carried on the wind, but as I wandered, they grew louder. I could feel them now, brushing against my mind, their words seeping into my thoughts like poison. They were not kind voices. They were not voices of comfort or understanding. They were the voices of the damned, the ones who had ventured too far into the forest, the ones who had sought answers and had paid the price. "Leave," one of them whispered, the voice trembling with fear. "Leave while you still can." But it was too late. I knew that now. There was no leaving. The forest had me. The forest would never let me go. Another voice joined in, louder this time, more urgent. "You should have listened," it hissed, a venomous edge to its tone. "We all thought we could leave. We all thought we could go back. But there's no way out, not once you've crossed the line." And then the voices began to speak in unison, a chorus of despair that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath me. "You are one of us now. You are part of the forest. There is no escape." I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight, to tear myself free from the invisible chains that had bound me to this place, but my body wouldn't respond. It was as though my mind had become a prisoner of my own thoughts, and my body had been hollowed out, a shell without purpose, without will. I stumbled forward, my legs unsteady beneath me, my feet dragging through the thick mud that had once been solid ground. I felt the forest closing in around me, the trees bending toward me as though they were alive, watching me, waiting for me to make my final mistake. Every step I took felt like an eternity, each footfall sinking deeper into the muck, into the dark, suffocating embrace of the earth. My surroundings blurred in and out of focus, as though I were walking through a dream, or perhaps through some twisted nightmare where the rules of reality no longer applied. The trees shifted and moved in ways that shouldn't have been possible, their trunks bending unnaturally, their branches twisting and curling like fingers beckoning me forward. The voices, oh, the voices, grew louder with each step, filling my mind until it was impossible to hear anything else. They were no longer just whispers. They were screams, shouts of terror, voices begging me to turn back, to run, to escape before it was too late. But there was no running. There was nowhere to go. The forest had me, and it always would. I had become part of it, part of its ancient, unyielding hunger. Every breath I took filled my lungs with the scent of the earth, with the acrid stench of decay and the fetid smell of rot. It was as if the forest itself was feeding on me, drawing strength from my fear, from my terror. And with every step, every breath, I felt my strength draining away, as though the forest was sucking the very life out of me. The ground beneath my feet had become spongy, soft, as though it were made of flesh, as though the earth itself had taken on a life of its own. I felt a sickening sensation crawl up my spine, a feeling like something was stirring beneath the soil, something large, something that had been waiting, biding its time. And then I heard it. A low, guttural growl, emanating from deep within the earth, a sound that reverberated through my bones, through my very soul. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The growl grew louder, closer, and I could feel the ground trembling beneath me as something massive began to rise from the depths of the earth. It was then that I realized what had happened. The forest was alive. Not just the trees, not just the earth. The forest itself was a living, breathing entity, and it had taken me into its heart, into its very being. I had become its prey, its offering, its sacrifice. The growl became a roar, and the ground split open once more, this time wider, deeper, as a massive dark shape emerged from the earth. It was not human, not animal. It was something else entirely, something ancient and terrible. A creature born from the very core of the earth itself, a being forged from the darkness that had existed long before the first tree had ever sprouted. It was a force, a presence, a hunger incarnate, and as it towered over me, its shadow swallowing the light, I realized the truth. The forest had never been a sanctuary. It had never been a place of peace, of safety. It had always been a trap, a prison, a domain where creatures like this ruled. And now I was its prisoner. I was nothing more than a part of the forest, a part of the dark, twisted thing that had claimed me. The earth shook beneath my feet. The trees groaned, their limbs reaching out to me like clawed hands. I was no longer an individual. I was no longer human. I was a part of something much, much older, and there would be no escape, not for me, not for anyone who ventured too deep. The forest had me now, and it always would. The world seemed to warp and twist around me, the reality I once knew crumbling away, replaced by something far darker, far more unnatural. The towering creature before me, still emerging from the earth, was like nothing I had ever seen. Its form was a grotesque amalgamation of shadow and flesh, its features shifting and warping with each passing second, as though it were made of the very nightmares of the forest. Its massive limbs twisted unnaturally, like the branches of the gnarled trees surrounding me, and its dark, pulsating mass exuded a deep, resonating growl that rattled the air and shook my bones. The ground beneath me continued to tremble, and I could feel the very earth itself shifting, as if the creature's presence was bending the laws of nature to its will. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but my body, my legs, my very mind betrayed me. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I was paralyzed in terror, locked in place as the forest itself closed in around me. I could feel the trees shifting, their roots writhing beneath the soil, as if they too were alive, as if they were part of this monstrous entity that had awakened from the bowels of the earth. The air grew thick, suffocating, heavy with the scent of decay, and the sound of the growling creature reverberated through my chest, vibrating in my very bones. And yet, in the midst of this chaos, I could hear something else, a voice. Not a voice of the forest, not the dark whispers that had followed me for so long, but a voice that was strangely familiar. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. It was a voice I had once known, a voice that had haunted me long before I ever set foot in this cursed forest. "You shouldn't have come here." The words, soft and sorrowful, cut through the oppressive darkness like a beam of light in a pitch-black room. It was the voice of someone I had lost, someone I had once cared for. "You were warned, but now there is no going back." The voice echoed in my mind, pulling me out of the suffocating grasp of terror, if only for a brief moment. I felt the weight of those words, the warning that had been buried deep within my subconscious, a warning I had ignored, dismissed in my search for answers. The figure before me, the massive creature, let out a deafening roar, snapping me back into the present, into the nightmare that I was trapped in. The roar echoed through the trees, through the very air, rattling the leaves and sending ripples of panic through my body. And then, as if in response to my fear, the ground beneath my feet began to shift once more. It was as though the very earth were alive, its surface rippling like water, and I could feel the presence of something ancient, something unspeakable, lurking just beneath the soil. The creature, now fully emerged from the earth, raised its massive, twisted head, and I could see it clearly. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, were like black voids, empty, endless, and I felt my soul being drawn into them, as if it were being sucked away, as though I were being consumed by the very darkness that surrounded me. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I couldn't tear my gaze from those voids, from the depths of the creature's being. And then, as if to mock my helplessness, the creature spoke. Its voice was not a growl, not a roar, but a deep, rumbling whisper, as though it were speaking directly into my mind, bypassing language altogether. "You were never meant to find me," it said, the words dripping with an ancient malice that made my blood run cold. "This place, this forest, is mine. And you—" It paused as if savoring the moment, savoring my fear. "You are nothing more than a morsel, a passing whisper in the wind. You are food for the roots, a sacrifice to the land." Its voice, its words, wrapped around me like a noose, tightening with every breath I took. The air grew even thicker, heavier, suffocating me as the creature took a step forward, its massive form looming over me, its presence crushing. I could feel its essence, its power radiating outward, surrounding me, pushing me down, down into the earth. "You should have listened," it whispered again, its voice a hiss that sent chills racing down my spine. "Now you belong to me, and there will be no escape." I wanted to run, I wanted to scream, to fight, to do anything to break free from its grasp, but I was rooted to the spot, my body unresponsive, my mind overwhelmed by the creature's presence. The forest had claimed me. I was no longer an outsider. I was no longer a wanderer. I was part of it now. The creature took another step, its limbs creaking like the branches of ancient trees, and I felt the earth beneath me respond, as though it were reaching out to claim me, to pull me into its depths. And then, just as I thought I could bear it no longer, the creature's form began to distort, to shift, as if it were made of smoke, of shadows, warping in ways that defied all logic. It seemed to melt into the air, its form dissolving, and then with one final earth-shattering roar it was gone. I stood alone in the clearing, the silence deafening, the air still and heavy with the presence of the creature that had just been there. But the forest remained dark and oppressive, the trees towering above me like silent sentinels, their roots extending deep into the earth. And as I stood there, struggling to catch my breath, I realized something that chilled me to my core. The forest was still watching me. It had never stopped. The presence of the creature may have dissipated, but the forest itself remained. It had claimed me, and it would never let me go. I was part of its tangled web now. I was part of the earth, part of the trees, part of the shadows that stretched long into the night, and there would be no escape. The forest had me. It had always had me, and I was lost. Forever. The silence that enveloped me was suffocating, pressing down on me from all sides, as though the very air had become a physical weight. The forest had consumed me, body and soul, its presence an unyielding force that wrapped around me like a suffocating shroud. But the silence was deceptive. The forest was never truly silent. It was alive with sounds that were too subtle, too distant to fully comprehend. The wind rustling through the branches, the creaking of the trees as they swayed, the soft whispers that seemed to come from the very earth beneath my feet. These were all part of the pulse of the forest, and the pulse was growing faster, stronger, as if the forest was aware of me, aware of my every breath, every movement. I could feel it now, the forest's heartbeat, reverberating through the ground, through the trees, through my very bones. It was a rhythm I could no longer ignore, a rhythm I could not escape. As I stood there alone in the clearing, I felt the weight of the forest's gaze upon me. It was not just the trees, it was the earth itself, the roots that stretched deep, beneath the surface, the very soil that seemed to breathe with the life of the land. It was as though the forest was watching me, waiting for something, waiting for me to make a move, to show a sign of weakness. But I was beyond that now. I had nothing left to give. The forest had taken everything, my body, my mind, my soul. I was nothing more than a hollow shell, a vessel, a part of the forest's ever-expanding dark presence. It had claimed me, and there was no escaping it. And yet, despite the overwhelming weight of the forest's presence, despite the suffocating silence that had fallen over me, there was a stirring within me, a flicker of something, a feeling that I couldn't name. It was faint, barely noticeable, but it was there, an urge to move, to leave, to run from this place that had become my prison. My heart pounded in my chest, and for the briefest of moments I thought I had regained some sense of control. Maybe I could fight back. Maybe I could outrun the forest's grasp. But as soon as the thought crossed my mind, I knew the truth. There was no running. There was no escaping. The forest had already won. It had claimed me body and soul, and now I was a part of it, a part of its twisted, eternal hunger. I began to walk, slowly at first, unsure of where I was going, unsure of where the path would take me. But as I walked, the forest seemed to open up before me, as though it were guiding me, pulling me deeper into its heart. The trees parted, revealing a narrow path, one that I had never seen before, one that seemed to beckon me forward. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper, and the feeling of something watching me returned, stronger than before. It was as though the very forest itself was leading me to something ancient and terrible, something that had been waiting for me. The path wound deeper into the forest, the trees growing thicker, their trunks gnarled and twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The ground beneath my feet was soft, spongy, and I could feel the roots of the trees curling up through the soil, as if trying to pull me down into the earth. It was then that I heard it again. The whispering. The voices that had followed me since the moment I had stepped into this cursed forest, but now they were clearer, louder, more insistent. "Turn back," one voice pleaded, its tone desperate. "It's too late for you." Another voice joined in, its words cold and final. "There's no escaping now. You are part of the forest. You always have been." I wanted to scream, to cover my ears, to shut out the voices that had haunted me for so long, but I couldn't. The whispers were in my mind now, their words seeping into my thoughts, into my very soul, and as the path twisted and turned, I felt the presence of the creature, the one that had risen from the depths of the earth, following me, watching me from the shadows. Its eyes, those endless voids, were always there, always lurking, always waiting for me to make a mistake. And I knew, deep down, that it was only a matter of time before the creature would claim me once and for all. The path continued to wind deeper into the heart of the forest, and I stumbled forward, my mind foggy, my body weary. I was no longer sure if I was walking or if the forest was simply carrying me, pulling me along like a marionette, forcing me to move at its whim. The trees began to close in around me, their branches thickening, their roots spreading across the ground, blocking the path ahead. The air grew colder still, and I could feel a heavy, oppressive weight pressing down on me, suffocating me. It was then that I saw it. In the distance, barely visible through the thick mist that had begun to gather, I saw a shape, a figure. It was tall, humanoid in shape, but its features were indistinct, obscured by the swirling fog. It was standing motionless in the center of the path, as if waiting for me, waiting for my approach. My heart skipped a beat, and a wave of terror washed over me. The figure did not move, did not speak. But I knew it was waiting for me. It was waiting for me to make the final step. I tried to turn around, to run, to retreat from the path that had led me here, but my body refused to obey. I was frozen, paralyzed by fear, my legs refusing to carry me away from the figure that stood before me. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and I could hear the voices of those who had come before me. Those who had ventured too far into the forest, their souls now trapped in this place for eternity. "Hey, it's too late," they cried. "We tried to leave, we couldn't, and neither will you." The figure before me began to move, its long limbs stretching and twisting unnaturally, its shadow growing, engulfing the path ahead. As it drew closer, I could see its face, or what I assumed to be its face. It was a mask of darkness, hollow and empty, a void that seemed to swallow the light around it. And then the creature spoke. Its voice was deep, guttural, a sound that rumbled through the earth itself, vibrating my very bones. "You have come far, traveler," it said, its voice like 100 whispers speaking in unison. "But now, you must remain. You are one with the forest, and the forest is one with you."